Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven and WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, one great group that makes New Haven tick is the Jewish Historical Society of Greater New Haven. They've been around for decades, doing books and public events and archives about the Jewish community, New Haven's rich history of Jewish community, and works in concert with 4 or 5 other ethnic historical societies in New Haven, housed at the Ethnic Heritage Center near Southern on Fifth Street. Well, the JHS has a great program coming up this weekend, Sunday, March 2nd. It's called Bullets, Badges, and Making Waves, Jewish Women in World War II New Haven. It's a program about the lives of 7 women and how their lives were changed in World War II and why it matters today. To tell us all about that are Rhoda Zoller and Nicole Zador. Did I say last name right? Of the Historical Society, talking about how they put together the program, and Jennifer Klein, a Yale history professor, who both on that program and today is going to offer a little bit of historical overview of how World War II shaped women's roles in U.S. society. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Paul.
And I'm going to ask you to get so close you're almost touching the mic, Rhoda. Okay. So, Rhoda, tell us, it starts at 2 p.m. at the New Haven Museum. What's going to happen at this program Sunday?
Well, we are going to be showing clips of some oral history interviews that I conducted back in 2008 as part of a project that was initiated by the Jewish Women's Archive outside Boston. And I was president of the Jewish Historical Society at the time, and I had been doing some projects with the Hartford Jewish Historical Society, and Estelle Kafer, who is the executive director in Hartford, told me that they were interested in doing oral histories of women whose lives were changed by World War II. Most of the women were on the home front, but their lives were changed drastically when a lot of the men enlisted and were drafted and went overseas. Some of them enlisted, and some of them became Rosie the Riveters, working in factories, making munitions to support the war effort. And through the wonderful board of the Jewish Historical Society, we were able to identify women. Marvin Barger, who was our archivist, who passed away several years ago, knew everybody. And his wife, Mitzi Barger, who was actually one of the people that we interviewed for this project, also knew everybody. And other board members suggested folks that we should interview. And Marvin was our videographer. And he and I conducted interviews with 7 women. 4 of them had their lives changed through what they did on the home front. Do you want me to read their names?
It's okay. We said Rita Small Melman, Mitzi Fenster Barger, Lucille Wolf Alderman, Rose Rosenberg Dubin, Ruth Granick, Edith Launder Gilman, and Laura Small Levine, and 2 of them are still living, correct?
2 of the women are.
And it's a great thing you got the recording before they passed.
Yes.
So we're going to have an event where we're going to see some of these video clips. Nicole, I assume as the archivist, you played a real role in putting together the materials for this. So what's going to happen in addition this Sunday at the New Haven Museum at 2 p.m. to watching some of these clips?
Well, we've really put together a program that combines the great primary resource of the oral history interviews with additional materials from the archives to provide context to what was happening at that time. We will also have members of the family speaking and sharing more personal stories, and there will be an exhibit of material from the Jewish Jewish historical
like documents and articles and things like that?
Documents, articles, photographs. There's some like ephemera, like cute greeting cards for waves specifically.
And by waves, we're talking about the Navy women accepted for volunteer emergency service to free up men for sea duty. I love sea duty.
Precisely, yeah.
That's a great phrase.
Yeah, and it really found some really cool things. For example, in her interview, Ruth Granick is a little bit vague about what her work really was and how it was viewed, but through looking through her papers, I found this letter like thanking her for her work and like acknowledging the receipt
in the
of,
waves.
Yes, in the waves specifically.
And what did the women do in waves?
Well, a variety of roles. Ruth, in particular, was working in communication, so a lot of her work was with intercepting like messages coming in. I don't know if
Really?
she was like decoding them, but she was typing them, and she was apparently a very fast typist. And she received like a ribbon for her work there. But the letter acknowledging this award said, like due to the nature of this unit's work, you can't publicize like your receipt of this. So stuff like that. But
And then some of the other people, what were, just very briefly without going into all their stories, Rhoda, what were some of these women doing in World War II in addition to working in waves?
Women on the home front, Rita Small Millman was 13 when Pearl Harbor was attacked, and her family owned and operated the National Hotel on Crown Street in New Haven.
It's had a story history of its own going
Yes.
into the 80s. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
You remember that because you worked for Rhoda worked for the
Yes.
city in economic development, had a whole career. And
Right.
that was one.
And when her brother was drafted and her father enlisted, she and her mother ran the hotel, and she talked about running the switchboard and shoveling coal into the furnace to be sure there was enough heat. Women on the home front talked about being sure blackout shades were down, collecting things.
That was just to me because you guys, I really love this movie you presented as part of this program a couple weeks ago at Bethel Kessler, Israel, that the Hartford Jewish Historic Club put together. I was blown away by the quality of that documentary and the substance of the women's stories. And I hadn't known, not having lived through it, that they used to have blackouts so that we were worried about being bombed and they didn't want to give people
Absolutely.
targets.
Absolutely.
That was fascinating for me to learn.
Right. And the rationing, and, you know, Mitzi Barger talked about how they had a dog in the family and they saved their meat stamps for meat for the dog, and they ate dairy.
So interesting. Oh, that's hilarious. and just for full disclosure, my wife Carol Bass is involved with JHS. She's been involved in this program, and she will also be speaking at Sunday's program. She did some of the research and writing
Yes, yes.
for this program.
We're so fortunate that she has been our writer. This is the third program we're doing in memory of Judith Ann Schiff, who was one of the founders of both the Jewish Historical Society and the Ethnic Heritage Center. And she also served as the city historian and had a job for a very long time as the chief research archivist at Yale. And she passed away in 2022, and along with the New Haven Museum, we have decided that every March we will have a women's history program in her honor. So this is really the third annual Judith Ann Schiff Women's History Program.
We're talking about that on Dateline New Haven and WNHH-FM. We're speaking with Rhoda Zoller, Nicole Zetter, and Jennifer Klein, talking about this Sunday's program, March 2nd at 2 p.m. at the New Haven Museum. Bullets, Badges, and Making Waves, Jewish Women in World War II, New Haven. Jennifer Klein, you've written a lot about not just Jewish women in World War II, but 20th century women in the workplace. And, you know, when I've heard some of what Rhoda said now, and Nicole, and from when Carol was working on it, these are very interesting stories about these specific women. Very interesting stories about how their lives are affected. There's a broader story. Why does this story matters because everyone's story matters. Why does this matter in a broader sense about what happened with women in World War II?
Well, first of all, we should remember that Americans had just been through over a decade of depression. So now there were all these jobs opening up. And it's not as though women had not been in the workplace and moved into the workplace, but they had been, forced to work in lower paying, insecure kind of manufacturing jobs or domestic labor. And now they finally got to move in to the higher paying core jobs in the economy. And so what this also meant was...
What kind of jobs was that, Jennifer?
So they were working, now that auto factories had been converted to make tanks and airplanes, they were doing that kind of work. They were working on armaments, bombshells. They were working in all of the defense-related industries. They worked in shipyards now as welders. So they actually got to move into a skilled position.
What was thought of then as guy stuff?
Exactly.
And then it thought of again as guys.
Exactly. So what actually
Get ahead of the story.
both the employers and the government decided, okay, now we'll just manipulate the gender categories to fit this need. So instead of saying women were too weak or couldn't learn technical skills, now they would say, well, women have these, delicate fingers and can really do the work on circuit boards. Or women, can actually like stitch together the bomb plates. And so they just kind of regendered the jobs. And the other thing that became important was because there was a National War Labor Board to maintain standards during the war, is they actually issued an equal pay order for women in 1944. Yes. But what it said is equal pay on equal jobs for equal work. So it meant they had to actually be doing those same jobs.
So why did Lilly Ledbetter need to have a law named after her a century later or 70 years later?
You know why? Because the workplace was resegregated after the war along the lines of gender as well as race.
And maybe Nicole and Rhoda could talk about this too. What did it mean for the women when they had these opportunities? Okay, it was an intense time in the country where people worried about their own survivals, their family survivals. But they also now had these opportunities to become fuller people almost, right? And pursue other work. What did it mean for the women involved?
The two women who joined the Waves that we interviewed really saw it as an opportunity to see the world and get away from home. And we're very clear that was part of their motivation. And that was...
Or how about to be doing circuit boards or welding or, doing work that used more of the capabilities that women were told they couldn't do before, but they were told they could do?
Go ahead.
Well, there was one person interviewed, Laura Levine, who worked as a lathe operator in the Watertown Arsenal around Boston. And she definitely took a lot of pride in her work. And she noted that a lot of the women, there were just a lot of women there, and they were all, they were taught how to operate a lathe, and there was a lot of camaraderie. But she also framed it as kind of a necessity. She was traveling around with her husband, who's in the military, and they didn't make enough money, really, on his salary alone to survive. Like they were renting a one room out of a house, and it didn't have a wall. They had to put up a curtain. So it was both a way to establish herself and grow, but also it was just a necessity and something that she needed to do.
And she also talked about how difficult it was to work in the factory and how regimented the day was. And there's a picture we have in our archives of her, and there's a clock on the wall, and the clock is at noon. And she said, "You see that clock? It's pointed to noon. That was the only time we could stop working, when we had our lunch break."
Because would you say, Jennifer, I want to throw this at you. You think sometimes there's a glamorization of old factory work? I don't know if you remember Adolph Reed, the political scientist, used to say to me, why is everybody glamorizing? We want those old factory jobs back at Winchester when it was dirty work, it was dangerous, but the difference was they had unions.
Exactly.
So when people say they want their work, it's not that they want their fingers chopped off or their brain being battered by the noise of a machine for 12 hours. It's that the new jobs that replaced the factory jobs didn't have unions, so you no longer could easily or just solidly support a family on the work you got if you hadn't gone to high school, or even if you did. So what about that work? When Rhoda's talking about the conditions there, is it a more mixed picture? Because when I think of the Rosie Riveter documentary and stuff I've read in the past, it's like women got to do this great work. The men only got to do that before. They really saw what they could do. And then all of a sudden, boom, the war was over. They were told to go back in their place again, just the way that African-American soldiers came back to America and told to go back to their place. And that all of a sudden it was cut short. And I'm not doubting any of that, but I'm wondering if it's a little more complicated.
Well, I would say, first of all, yes, the big difference for white women, black women who worked in these factories was they finally got to move into a job where there was a union. And so that meant not only the better pay, but you could actually have a grievance system when there were safety issues.
Did they let them in the union?
Yes. And there was an agreement that unions would be able to maintain their membership during the war, but they had to not walk out on strike. And let's think about this. This is an all-out, all-hands-on-deck war. So it's not only that they were long shifts, but you had factories running 24 hours a day. So there were also night shifts, early morning shifts. And the other thing that I think is really crucial, again, is that this is coming on the heels of the New Deal. So you also now have the Fair Labor Standards Act and these different regulatory agencies who were there to enforce labor standards. And one other thing was the Fair Employment Practices Committee, which would prohibit racial discrimination. And, you know, they could just have hearings, but at least people could step out and complain and say, this is not, these are not the high standards we want in these jobs. But something else I'd also like to mention, because it came up earlier when you talked about rationing food shades, is the other thing that really, I think, empowered women during the war was they became the enforcers of the price caps. So they went to
What
work.
price caps are we talking about?
So we're talking about the Office of Price Administration in order to make sure that that stores and producers wouldn't just like take advantage of everybody through price gouging. It declared that there would be a price ceiling on not just consumer goods, but also on housing. And so these women really became the people who would go to the butcher shops, who would go to the grocery store, and they would enforce the prices. And so they really became the political organized arm of the OPA, and they made it work. So they were empowered, I think, now more as workers, but they were also empowered as consumers because, of course, they were responsible for all the purchasing that was done for the household. But it became, you know, that kind of private role of shopping and domestic consumption now became a public role that was the patriotic enforcement that would keep the war effort going all out.
Well, we're talking about women, Jewish women in World War II, New Haven, women in general World War II, New Haven, with members of the Jewish Historical Society of Greater New Haven, who are putting on a great program this Sunday, March 2nd, at 2 p.m. at the New Haven Museum about New Haven Jewish women who lived through that era and how it changed their lives. What happened afterwards? What happened to these women afterwards?
Some of them, like Mitzi Barger, used the training that they got during that time. She she joined the U.S. Cadet Nurse Corps, I believe, one of the last classes, and she took that training and was a nurse for decades and was awarded several certificates for her hard work and dedication.
Most of them went home and raised their families. Most of them had children and went home and raised their families. Several of them talked about how difficult it was when their fiancés or boyfriends or husbands were overseas and they didn't know whether they were going to be coming back.
What happens when they do come back and both of you have been changed by those experiences? What happens when the crisis is over, you're alive and together, but you're not the same people completely as you were before? Do they go back to their old roles? Do they demand new roles?
I think they were very happy to go back to their old roles. Those who were waiting for the men to come back.
When I look at the story, and I'm interested in all three of your perspectives on this, I wonder whether the legacy is what happened with the children, the daughters and the granddaughters of that generation. And then the three of you really represent three different generations of that legacy. And I wonder how you think about your own experiences. I happen to know, two of you. I know, Rhoda, you were a single mom, but you
Right.
had this very successful career in New Haven in economic development and community work. And, Jennifer is a scholar. And I'm guessing maybe Nicole grew up in an era of different expectations. I'm not sure. When you hear the story, each of you, of what happened with the women during World War II, what happened afterwards, how does that relate to the life you've lived?
I'm part of the post-war baby boom, and
Produced the only good music that ever existed, not to mention the movies, right? That's what younger people I work with can't stand hearing. Yeah.
I agree.
We are insufferable. Yeah. But that's
My
point.
father was a flight surgeon in the Army in World War II, and my parents got married while he was still in the service. They got married in 1944. He was stationed in India and China. And we have a scrapbook with pictures that he sent back. And my mother worked. She was in advertising, and she worked and lived with my father's parents in Brooklyn. And when he came back, they started raising a family. I was born, a couple of years afterwards, and then came one sister and a second sister and a brother, and my mother stayed home until we were raised, and then she got jobs.
And did you think that's going to be me when you're growing up, or what when you looked at your mom?
That's what she wanted for me.
She wants you to be a homemaker.
Right. No, she used to tell me that my kids were very independent because they had to be. And that was not a compliment.
Oh, that's so interesting as well. And did you have to overcome in your own mind society's expectations for what your role would be when you did determine that you were going to have a career in addition to being a mom?
I really, I guess there were two things. I was divorced, and I really needed to support my kids. My late ex-husband moved to the Boston area after he finished medical school, and I stayed in New Haven, and I had gotten my job, which I loved, working for the city of New Haven.
Right, it wasn't just a job for you, it was a calling.
You're right, and I had a wonderful support system to help me with my children. So I felt very confident that I could handle it, and I was very fortunate to have people above me who understood that my priority was my family.
Well,
and
Jennifer,
that was never an issue.
Well, Jennifer, when you were growing up, so you were you're a scholar, you were very active in public life. When you were growing up, was the expectation that you would be someone like that you should pursue your dreams in society? Did you have a parent who was similar and thought the boys should do that, or just the girls? I mean, what was that like?
Oh, no. Well, my parents were political activists as well. And, it's interesting because during World War II, I had one grandfather who was in a Nazi labor camp as a prisoner, and I had one grandfather who was D-Day +3.
Wow.
And
wait, what does +3 mean?
Day 4.
3 days. Okay.
Yeah. So, but, it's important to note that as the war ended, people didn't want to let go of these expanded rights and public supports that they had. They fought to keep the Fair Employment Practices Committee going. They actually fought to keep the Office of Price Administration price controls going. They fought to keep rent control.
Boy, that's a bygone.
Exactly. And so I find that really inspiring. During the war, actually, the government provided health care for all the wives of servicemen, especially for maternity and delivery of babies. And so there was also childcare there. And so actually people believed, because they were part of that effort, they believed in what public services could provide. They were prepared to fight for them. And that inspires me.
What was the expectations of you growing up? Did you feel growing up that like what you said mattered, that you had as much right as a boy and then a young man to be going for prominent positions? And
yes, in a public sense, definitely. But only my brother was bar mitzvahed because that's what was important for the family, and that was what was important for my grandparents. And so my parents were out there marching for the Equal Rights Amendment, and I was there with them. We actually met Gloria Steinem when I was about 11 years old. But things hadn't yet really changed within the household, and that is in some ways the hardest place to change gender roles.
Mm-hmm. Now, Nicole, when you listen to this, were you bat mitzvahed?
I was, yes.
By the
had more
time
to do with the reform
younger.
movement, but I was bat mitzvahed, and there was definitely I was encouraged to pursue all of my dreams, and there were high expectations professionally. But I also think that I had other expectations in terms of like my ability to cook and how I would participate in household things. That
Am I asking how old you are?
I'm 27.
So 27, the expectation is you're going to be the cook.
But yeah, it did not turn out that way. In growing up, that was definitely the expectation.
That's interesting.
Yeah, like Jennifer, in my household, the roles were pretty defined, and so that was definitely still around.
What happens when you've been working hands-on this story about the 7 women in World War II? Does it make you reflect at all on the tradition you come from or how your life has played out? Do you see yourself in their stories? You don't have to pretend you do. I'm really just curious.
Like to a certain extent, yes.
Or does it just seem like that's crazy? That was a long time ago. Or of course it was like that. I don't understand why it could never be like that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's that crazy. Like there are a lot of similarities, and I think a lot of their emotions and their experiences are things that I can relate to, and things that I think a lot of women can relate to. Going on like new experiences, facing discrimination, all this kind of stuff. I think there's a through line.
And we're talking about bullets, badges, and making waves. Jewish women in World War II, New Haven, the subject of an event this coming Sunday, March 2nd at 2 p.m. at New Haven Museum, put on by the Jewish Historical Grace Society, along with New Haven Museum, about the lives of 7 women, how they were changed in New Haven in World War II. The night before that, March 1st, Saturday, there's going to be a screening of a movie at the Whitney Center on Leader Hill Drive in Hamden at 7:30. And I didn't know about this. This is so interesting. It's called Bombshell, the Hedy Lamarr story. And she was, of course, the famous actress. And what people didn't know was that she also was an inventor, that she invented a covert communication system to fight the Nazis in World War II. She was also a spy. And that later was used as the basis for secure Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth. A lot of times in the military, inventions are made that have civilian applications. She didn't get credit for it for decades. At the end of her life, other people took credit for what she invented. Rhoda, why are we showing this film, and how does this...
Well, we wanted to give a variety of stories about as many women as possible who were involved in the war effort. And I think it was actually Carol who mentioned this when we were planning. And we looked into it and found that the Whitney Center, which shows movies regularly for the residents there, was interested in participating with us. And we thought this would be another important story about a woman that people have heard of in the context of an actress, but not in the context of an inventor and a spy and someone who really did not get credit for what she
Jennifer,
did.
you're talking about what was considered male work and then not. So she was doing, when you talk about tech bros, right? Like who are the tech titans running our country right now in the world? She actually had this innovation, the tech innovation that she didn't get credit for decades. What's that all about?
Men taking credit for women's work?
Okay, I guess it's not that complicated.
That's easy, Paul.
Does
That's
that still happen in the world you're in?
Yes. And, but the thing, it took decades for that equal pay struggle to play out, because what happened was they said you had to do equal pay for equal work. And yet women were put back into very different jobs. And so they were never going to get that same pay because they weren't doing the same work. And so it took decades to try to move that along. Even the Equal Pay Act of 1963 couldn't get to the point where you could say, you know what, how about equal pay for comparable work? And so that is an ongoing struggle, I think. And, we're seeing the dismantling, of course, of the regulations that govern safety and health in the workplace now, as well as the decline of unions. And so I think, as you suggested before, even if women are in different kinds of jobs, they're in service sector jobs and healthcare jobs and education, those could be jobs that are good jobs, secure and well-paying, if they can have the unions that these women had in the 1940s.
I'm so inspired by everything the Jewish Historical Society does. I've been inspired for, it's been around 50 years.
Almost, yeah. 50.
Yeah, and I think I've known of it for about 45, and they put out 10 amazing books. I've read them all cover to cover. And I guess you, Rhoda, went with Judith Schiff to that conference where Howard Zinn spoke, if I'm not mistaken, about people's history back in the 70s.
I was not.
But you were
involved
part
at
of the
that
group
time.
inspired, to do people's history. That's why he did the oral history. That was a big thing in the 70s and 80s, the Firefox Project, Studs Terkel. And it was this idea
I was
that
in
there's...
Chicago, and Studs Terkel
And the
was
Daily
one of
Radio
my
show
idols.
and working
Yes.
inspired me. But the
Right.
idea that telling people's stories, and that's a lot of what Jennifer's research I know is about, that the stories of people who aren't in the prominent roles, aren't better known, they have so much power, and they're central to how we understand our world. And, Jewish Historical Society has had this great history, not just the books and the archives, but you worked in the 1988 350th birthday of New Haven Colony, got together with the other historical societies, Puerto Rican, African American, Ukrainian, Irish American, Italian American. You did this great thing on the green, and then you turned that into an organization that continues to this day. We work together and celebrate all of our heritage together. And it's been interesting to me to watch the waves that right now there seems to be this renaissance. You put on this program for 3 years. You got a separate program coming up on issues in town. You have all sorts of new people involved. So I was just interested, you got Nicole working. How long, having a staff archivist is pretty cool for a grassroots nonprofit organization. When did you come to take that job, Nicole, and how did you end up in that?
It's coming up on a year. I started February of last year. And I count myself as lucky to be working for this organization. I grew up in Central Wisconsin with a very small Jewish community, but I knew that I wanted to work in the Jewish community in some way, just not as like a traditional Jewish professional. And I've always loved books and history. And my grandmother was a librarian, which definitely influenced. Yeah, definitely influenced
doing
me.
decimal system today. Yeah.
Yep.
So what about archivist skills? Had you had some kind of training, interest in the actual work of that? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I received my master's of library science from Simmons University in Boston. And they taught me a lot of kind of the theoretical underpinnings of archival management, like the arrangement, how to make things discoverable, as well as practical skills like book repair, preservation, and that sort of thing.
And wow, that comes in because I've lost myself and drowned in all those archives you have, where you have like the Edgewood School cards of who each kid was, every year back in the day. And so how are you bringing that to this trove of documents you have, as well as the challenges of making information accessible electronically? What are you doing day to day with those skills at the Historical Society?
Yeah, so one of my biggest goals is to make more detailed and accessible finding aids for all our collections. I think, ideally we'd have a lot of things just completely accessible online, but that might be a little far off. But I think the first step is just to make the content and things that we have more available through basically guides to the collections that just provide very detailed information about the folders, that sort of thing.
And boy, is that collection growing. I mean, Rhoda,
is.
one of your projects last few years we've written about in The Independent, we love to do it every time you have a new one, is you're working with these other ethnic societies for walking tours of New Haven neighborhoods. And, I know you've done Upper Grand. Is that Upper or Lower Grand near downtown?
It's the part of Grand Avenue closest to downtown.
Yeah, what do you call that? Is there an upper or lower for that? Or I guess it's east-west.
I call it upper. I think we call it upper.
But in any case, I've got, Dixwell, you've done Worcester Square, you've done downtown. And these guides, you put out a booklet so you could read about the history of those. But you also could go online, right? If you have your phone.
Yes, there's a website.
And then you can listen to
audio
audio as you get to each of the slots. And I love the way behind not just people's history, but how the project unite with the other groups in town, saying that we respect and love each other's traditions. It's not about being tribal in a way that makes us divided as a people, but being united is a way that brings history and everyday stories that crosses boundaries, that very much preserves what we're about, where we came from, in a way together. And I really love that you do that. So what are you up to with the Walk New Haven? Is there more of that happening? What's been the reaction? Does it carry out that mission?
Well, in fact, I'm missing a meeting now to plan another walk.
Oh, yeah, where's that going to be?
Last year, we did a walk on Jane Jacobs' birthday. Every year around the world, on the weekend closest to May 5th, which Jane Jacobs was an urban historian and architect who was responsible for really making the preservation movement very popular and preserving a lot of historic buildings all over the world. And all over the world on her birthday, there are Jane's Walks. And last year, we kind of combined a Walk New Haven and a Jane's Walk, on a day that turned out to be a rainy day, but we had about 40 people who came, and we talked about New Haven as a model city in different eras and what that meant in different eras. And we are probably, last year we also did a walk in conjunction with the International Festival of Arts and
We've
Ideas.
been down a bunch of times. You get Ed Cherry going to Dixville Plaza.
And we will probably do that again as part of the International Festival. We, all of our tour leaders are volunteers, and they're very busy people. And one of the things that we encourage groups to do is to create their own tour guides using the material that is in our booklets, because it's a wonderful starting point. And as you said, there are videos, and anybody can pick up a book and get a group together and do a walking tour. It's on the website, and
when you did the one
available.
on West Grand, I remember when I was there that day at your launch, I hadn't known about the history of some of those buildings. That one of them had been an African American run nightclub with jazz that had people from all over. I only thought about Dixville Avenue for that, and you had the descent
right.
of the woman who ran it, who was there, and you
That's
had memories of people there. Harold Miller talking about his family had a shop where people ran in. It's just so rich and so fun.
Right.
And are you also working on any more of the books? You're already 10 volumes of Jews in New Haven, the best kind of people's history you can imagine. You working on that,
There's
Nicole?
discussion.
There's talk about volume 11. So we're gathering information.
What? Jennifer?
Well, when I met Nicole and Rhoda at the Ethnic Heritage Center to start this particular planning, I was stunned to see that there's floor to ceiling archival boxes.
Yeah.
And so I think that if there are high school students or college students who are looking for a topic for a research paper, there is incredible wealth of local material there. And I think it would just be an ideal research project right down the hill from Southern.
Well, it's really something where you guys are keeping history alive and helping us understand it in new ways. And thanks for all the great work you do in our community and that you were starting with the other
thank
groups.
you.
So let's just remind everybody one last time. Sunday, March 2nd, 2 p.m., New Haven Museum on Temple Street. It's going to be Bullets, Badges, and Making Waves, Jewish Women in World War II, New Haven. If you want to go to a movie Saturday night, I plan to be there, Whitney Center, the bombshell Hedy Lamarr story. So we're looking out for New Walk New Haven, look at Arts and Ideas, and maybe Volume 11, Jews in New Haven. Thanks for joining us, Rhoda Zoller, Nicole Zatter, and Jennifer Klein. Thanks to Harry Drost for working the controls. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all weekend long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.